Don't come tonight. You'll embarrass us. Patricia Reynolds sent that text at 6:14 p.m. 12 words, no explanation. Maya Reynolds read it once. She set the phone down. She said nothing. 29 years old, senior security architect at First Meridian Bank. Faded gray hoodie ink stain on the knee badge clipped inside the pocket. Across the city, her sister Chloe wore a $100,000 gown. She laughed. A stolen platinum card sat gripped in her hand like a trophy. 210 guests watched the terminal flash red at the head table. Nobody clapped. Nobody moved. Nobody understood what was actually happening. Chloe had no idea whose name was on the fraud system. That system was running every card in the ballroom tonight.
Gleaming POS terminals flashing red. The arrogant bride assumed she had won. Let's watch the trap close.
Patricia Reynolds' text landed at 6:14 p.m. 12 words, no signature, no explanation. Don't come tonight. You'll embarrass us in front of everyone. Maya Reynolds read it twice. She set the phone face down on the counter. She did not throw it. She did not cry. 29 years old senior security architect at First Meridian Bank, still in the faded gray hoodie she'd worn since her 6 a.m. shift review. A thin white scar crossed her left knuckle, old from a bike wreck at 14. Around her wrist sat a scratched steel watch that had belonged to her grandfather, the only piece of jewelry she owned. Across the city in a country club ballroom dripping with white orchids, her sister Chloe Reynolds handed a platinum credit card to a florist and laughed at nothing in particular, certain the theft underneath her wedding would stay buried forever. But Chloe had no idea what her sister actually did for a living, and she had no idea what was coming. Maya's apartment held 3 lamps, 1 couch, and a laptop she never closed all the way. She sat down at the kitchen table. She opened her banking app out of habit, the same habit she'd had for 6 years, checking balances the way other people check the weather. The number on the screen made her stop breathing for 1 full second. $15,240, charged 9 minutes ago. Merchant name Belle Rose Floral Design. She did not know a Belle Rose. She had never ordered flowers in her life. Her jaw tightened. Her hand stayed flat on the table. Somewhere down the hall, a neighbor's television murmured through the wall laugh track rising and falling, indifferent to the number glowing on Maya's screen. She scrolled up. She scrolled down. The charge sat there, patient, ugly, real. She thought of the text again. Don't come tonight. You'll embarrass us. 2 messages 6 minutes apart from 2 different corners of her life, and only one of them had bothered to explain itself. Her phone buzzed once. Henry Reynolds, her uncle, the only relative who ever remembered her birthday without a reminder. 48 years old, a quiet elementary school teacher with tired eyes and a suit 2 sizes out of fashion. His text read simply, "You okay? Your mom's acting strange tonight." Maya typed back 3 words. "I'm fine, Henry." She was not fine. She was calculating, not panic, not anger, just arithmetic. She opened the emergency card's full transaction history, the account she kept buried at the bottom of her banking app for exactly the kind of disaster she now suspected. She'd frozen that card mentally years ago, called it dead weight, a leftover safety net from a rougher year in her 20s. She had not touched it in 11 months. She had not authorized anyone to touch it either. The statement address caught her eye first. Not her apartment, not her old apartment. A street she didn't recognize, a zip code 2 towns over, dated a change of 3 weeks prior. Her stomach dropped an inch, then went still. She read the address again, slower this time, the way she read code when a system threw an error she didn't trust. 3 weeks. Someone had rerouted her mail 3 weeks before tonight's wedding, quietly, deliberately. And she hadn't noticed because nobody was supposed to notice. Not a mistake, not a glitch, a plan. She thought about who had access to her old paperwork. She thought about who had asked months ago for her social security number. "Just for the family insurance file, sweetie," in her mother's voice, syrupy and offhand at Sunday dinner. She had given it. She had trusted the request the way you trust a smoke detector you never test. Her laptop screen glowed blue in the dark kitchen. She pulled up her real terminal, the one with clearance. Most people at her firm didn't know she held the one that could trace a single card number through 40 layers of merchant processing in under a minute. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, fast, precise, silent. No music, no phone calls, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the click of keys. Line by line, the picture sharpened. A merchant account opened under a fabricated vendor name, a shipping redirect. A signature that wasn't hers, scanned and pasted onto an authorization form. Nobody at the bank had bothered to verify because the card belonged to an employee, and employees were supposed to be the last people who'd ever steal from themselves. She sat back. She exhaled through her nose. Outside, a car alarm chirped twice and went quiet. $15,000 for flowers. One wedding, one family, one woman uninvited from both. Maya closed the laptop halfway, the way she always did when she needed to think without the glow in her eyes. She looked at the scratched watch on her wrist. Her grandfather used to say patience was just anger that had learned to wait. She understood sitting there in the dark exactly what he meant. She did not text her mother back. She did not call her sister. She opened a new folder on her desktop, named it with today's date, and began saving screenshots one by one. Methodical, unhurried, each file a brick in a wall she was building, without anyone in that ballroom noticing the foundation had already been poured. Because Chloe had picked the wrong sister to rob, and by morning, the woman she'd banned from her wedding would know more about that stolen card than the bank itself did. Chloe posted the first photo at 7:02 p.m. A hallway lined with white orchids, her arm draped over a bridesmaid's shoulder. Caption glowing under the image, "Some people just don't fit the aesthetic. Bless it anyway." 41 comments in 6 minutes. Heart emojis, fire emojis. Not one person asking where the sister was. Maya saw it because Henry sent it to her, no caption of his own, just the screenshot and 3 dots that meant he didn't know what to say. She looked at the photo for 4 seconds. She looked at the orchids longer than she looked at her sister's face. 26 years old, Chloe Reynolds, receptionist at a downtown dental office, dressed tonight in a gown that cost more than she made in 4 months. She had always known how to look like money without ever earning it. She had learned that skill early, and she had learned it from watching their mother do the exact same thing for 30 years. Maya's terminal blinked. A new transaction. Then another. She watched the ledger update in real time the way other people watched a scoreboard, except this scoreboard was draining her savings one line at a time. $18,900 for the venue deposit, $6,400 for a designer gown fitting, rush same day, an unmistakable fingerprint of someone who never once considered getting caught. $9,700 for a photography package with a name Maya vaguely recognized from a magazine spread her mother had once pinned to the refrigerator. $35,000 and change. In under an hour, her hand did not shake. She noted the number, then noted the next one, and the one after that, each entry another brick laid without a sound. She thought about calling the fraud line and shutting the card down cold. 1 phone call, 90 seconds. The bleeding would stop before the appetizer course even started. Her thumb hovered over the number. She didn't dial it. Not mercy, not hesitation, strategy. A card frozen tonight was a card that vanished into an internal review queue, filed under routine, closed within a week with nothing more than a form letter and a new card number in the mail. A card left open, watched, documented, time-stamped, became something else entirely. Evidence. The kind no defense attorney could argue away as a misunderstanding between family. She opened her firm's internal compliance system, the one she'd helped design 3 years ago, back when nobody in her family had asked what she actually did all day. She typed her sister's full legal name into the query field. Chloe Marie Reynolds, date of birth. Social Security number the same 9 digits Maya had handed over 8 months ago at a kitchen table, trusting tired, distracted by a plate of her mother's overcooked pasta. The system returned a match instantly. A soft authorization override logged 4 days ago tied to Maya's account, submitted through a customer portal using Maya's social security number as the verification key. Not guessed. Not brute forced. Known. Someone had used Maya's own identity to unlock the very safeguard meant to protect her from exactly this. Cold, not the temperature kind. The kind that starts behind the sternum and spreads outward until your fingers go still on the keyboard. She sat with that for a long moment, not because she was shocked, because she wanted to make sure she understood the full weight of it before she did anything else. A stolen card was a civil headache, a police report, a mildly embarrassing family scandal that would blow over by Thanksgiving. A stolen identity used to bypass federal banking security protocols was a different animal entirely. Wire fraud, identity theft, bank fraud, the kind that came with a number attached, 18 U.S. Code Section 1344, the kind of charge that didn't care whose last name was on the wedding invitations. Maya's fingers moved again. She flagged the account under the bank's highest internal fraud tier, a designation reserved for cases bound for federal referral, not the customer service kind, not the polite kind. The kind that came with a task force, the kind that came with handcuffs if the evidence held. 3 clicks, one password she'd never shared with anyone, not even Henry. The override protocol activated silent invisible from the outside, a digital tripwire strung across every future transaction on that card. No siren went off in the ballroom. No lights flickered over the orchids. Chloe kept posing for photos, kept accepting champagne from a tray, kept believing the night belonged entirely to her. Not because she had to be careless, just because that's who she was. Maya closed the laptop screen halfway again. Her ritual, her tell that meant a decision had been made, and there was no undoing it now. She looked out the kitchen window at the dark street below, headlights sliding past, ordinary people driving home from ordinary nights. Somewhere out there, her sister was still smiling for the camera, still unaware that every swipe of that platinum card from this moment forward would land in a federal case file with Maya's name quietly attached as the reporting officer of record. Outrage would have been easy. Outrage would have felt good for about 10 minutes and accomplished nothing. Maya chose the harder thing instead, the colder thing, the thing her grandfather used to call the only kind of anger worth having, the kind that builds instead of burns. The digital trap was set. The bride, glowing under $12,000 of imported orchids, had no idea she was already walking right into it. The ledger crossed $50,000 at 8:47 p.m. Maya watched the number update from her kitchen table, the screen the only light in the apartment, now the rest of the city gone quiet outside her window. Venue rental $22,000. A last-minute upgrade to imported champagne $4,300. A signature floral arch that Belrose Floral Design had apparently built twice, once for a photo, and once for the actual reception, an extra $6,000 for the redundancy alone. $50,112. Her life savings, 7 years of overtime and careful budgeting and skipped vacations, funding a party she wasn't allowed to attend. Her phone buzzed against the table. Patricia Reynolds. Not a call. A text sent the way her mother always sent the messages she didn't want to defend out loud. Don't even think about showing up in one of your cheap hoodies. This is Chloe's night, not yours. Maya read it once. She set the phone screen down again, the same motion, the same stillness, a ritual she was building without meaning to. 58 years old, Patricia Reynolds, a woman who had spent 3 decades curating a version of the family that photographed well and explained nothing. She wore her disapproval the way other people wore perfume applied fresh every morning, never quite washing off. Not a request, not a warning. Just contempt dressed up as concern for appearances. Maya opened a new folder on her desktop. She dragged the screenshot in. She labeled it with a timestamp, the same clinical habit she used at work when a colleague tried to gaslight their way out of a security incident. Documentation didn't care about tone. Documentation didn't flinch. She sat back and let herself feel it for exactly one breath. The hoodie comment landed somewhere old, somewhere from a childhood of school photos where Chloe wore new dresses and Maya wore hand-me-downs 2 sizes too big. She let the feeling rise, sit in her chest, and pass. Then she went back to the numbers, because the numbers were the only thing in this family that had never once lied to her. Her terminal chimed softly, a queued transaction not yet cleared sitting in the merchant's pending file the way a check sits before it clears a bank. $25,000 flagged for the caterer, time-stamped for tonight, the payment structured to process at the end of the reception once final head count and service were confirmed. She stared at that number longer than any of the others. $25,000, one swipe away from finalizing, one swipe that would push the total damage past $75,000 before midnight, and one swipe that, thanks to the override she'd activated an hour earlier, was never going to clear. Not tonight, not on this card, not ever again. She pulled up the venue's public event page, cross-referenced against the caterer's invoicing system. Her fraud tier had automatic visibility into Terrace Hollow Country Club. Reception starting 7 p.m., open bar until 11, final billing scheduled for 9:30. 9:30, 90 minutes from now. Maya's pulse didn't spike. It steadied the way it always did right before a system deployment she'd spent weeks preparing for the calm that came from knowing every variable was finally accounted for. She thought about the fraud task force contact saved in her phone, a man named Officer Miller. She'd worked 2 prior cases with, both smaller, both nowhere near this personal. She thought about Henry still sitting somewhere inside that ballroom, watching a family he loved perform a version of itself that wasn't true. She thought about her grandfather's watch on her wrist, cold steel, against her pulse point, ticking down the same 90 minutes the caterer's invoice was ticking down. She stood up from the table for the first time in 2 hours. Her knees ached from sitting still so long, a small physical reminder that patience had a cost, even when it didn't show on the outside. She walked to her closet, not toward anything formal, not toward anything that pretended to belong in that ballroom. She pulled out the same gray hoodie, clean folded, deliberate. Her badge from work sat in the inside pocket where she always kept it, next to a small laminated card with her direct line to the bank's security operations center. Cheap hoodie. Patricia's words, cheap and dismissive, and Maya let them sit there without correcting them, because in 90 minutes the hoodie wouldn't be the thing anyone remembered about tonight. She checked the time, 8:51. She checked the ledger one final time before grabbing her keys, the number frozen where she'd left it, patient loaded, waiting. $50,112 spent. $25,000 queued, 1 override already in place. One sister who still had no idea the party was about to end very differently than she'd planned. Maya locked her apartment door behind her, stepped into the cool night air, and started the drive toward Terrace Hollow. The countdown to the reckoning had officially begun. Terrace Hollow's ballroom glowed gold under 100 hanging bulbs, chandeliers Chloe had insisted on despite the venue's own lighting, an extra $4,000. Nobody but Maya's terminal had noticed yet. Champagne towers stood at both ends of the room, glasses catching light like something out of a magazine spread Chloe had pinned to her mood board 18 months ago and never once let go of. 210 guests. Maya wasn't there to count them, but Henry Reynolds was standing near the back wall with a drink he hadn't touched, watching the room the way a man watches weather rolling in from a distance he can't quite judge yet. 48 years old, still in the slightly outdated suit he'd worn to every family wedding for a decade. Henry had learned long ago that speaking up at Reynolds family events cost more than it was worth. Tonight, though, something in his chest kept pulling tight every time he scanned the room and didn't find Maya's face among the 210. He found Patricia instead near the head table, adjusting a centerpiece that didn't need adjusting. "Where's Maya?" he asked, keeping his voice low, keeping it simple. Patricia didn't look up from the flowers. She had other plans. She didn't mention plans to me. Henry, Patricia's eyes finally met his flat final, the same tone she'd used on him since he was 19 and asking questions she didn't want answered. "Don't ruin your niece's night." Not an answer, not even close to one. He let it go because that's what Reynolds' family gatherings had always required of him, and he hated himself a little for it, every single time. Across the room, Chloe held court near the champagne tower, laughing at something her new husband had said, her gown catching light from every angle. 3 photographers circling her like satellites. She hadn't stopped moving since the ceremony ended, hadn't stopped performing the platinum card, sitting in a small, beaded clutch against her hip like a talisman she'd earned instead of stolen. "You have to see the honeymoon fund," she told a cluster of bridesmaids, voice pitched loud enough to carry. "Daddy set up an account years ago. Nobody in this family understands money the way I do." Not true, not even close to true, but nobody in that circle knew the real source of the last $75,000 floating through tonight's reception, and Chloe intended to keep it that way. Her new husband leaned in, half joking. "Should I be worried about a secret offshore fund I don't know about?" Chloe laughed sharp and bright, the kind of laugh built for an audience. "Relax, it's not offshore. It's just money that knows how to disappear when it needs to." She winked. "I've got connections that make sure nothing ever traces back." 3 of the bridesmaids laughed with her. Nobody asked what she meant. Nobody except Henry, who had drifted close enough during a lull in the music to catch the exchange whole. He didn't say anything. He filed it away instead, the way Maya might have, though he didn't yet know how much that instinct would matter by morning. Not remorse, not even a flicker of it. Just performance all the way down. The ballroom's POS terminals sat at 3 service stations along the back wall, sleek black machines the caterer used to run cards throughout the night for bar tabs and upgrade fees. At 9:14 p.m., one of them flickered, screen dimming for half a second before resetting itself, a silent software update nobody in the room noticed or cared to. Henry noticed. He watched the machine's screen blink once more oddly, like a held breath, then settle back into its normal glow. He didn't know what it meant. He only knew that something about tonight already felt wrong before the machines had anything to say about it. Patricia swept past him again, this time herding a group of elderly relatives toward the dance floor, her voice bright and hollow, the sound of a woman working very hard to keep a story from cracking. "Isn't she glowing?" she said to no one and everyone. "My daughter has always known how to do things properly. Properly." Henry turned the word over in his mind. Stolen flowers. Stolen champagne. A card that wasn't Chloe's funding a night built entirely on someone else's absence. He thought of Maya's empty apartment, dark and small compared to this glittering room, and something in him went quiet and cold and certain. Not loyalty to Chloe anymore. Not blind loyalty to any of them. Just clarity, arriving late, arriving heavy, the kind that doesn't announce itself with anger but settles instead, like a stone at the bottom of a glass. He checked his phone under the table, thumb hovering over Maya's contact. He didn't type anything yet. He just watched the screen, waiting the same way the whole room was unknowingly waiting for a terminal 90 minutes from clearing a bill nobody realized had already been condemned. The champagne kept flowing. The photographers kept circling. Chloe kept laughing at her own cleverness, utterly unaware that somewhere across the city, the woman she'd banned from tonight had already turned this entire performance into evidence. The champagne was about to stop flowing in a very public way.
No one expected such a ruthless betrayal from family. Chloe doesn't just steal her sister's money. She deliberately flaunts the stolen luxury online to maximize the psychological damage. If that were me, the sheer audacity of funding a $100,000 party with my identity would have sent me completely over the edge. Imagine the absolute entitlement required to laugh about offshore accounts while actively bankrupting your own flesh and blood. The karmic debt is stacking up fast.
By 9:40 p.m., Henry Reynolds had made up his mind about one thing he was going to text her. He stepped out onto the terrace away from the music, the string lights strung overhead doing little to warm the cool night air. His thumbs moved slow and deliberate over the screen. "Something feels off tonight. Your mom won't tell me why you're not here. You okay?" He hit send before he could talk himself out of it. 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then vanished, then appeared again. Maya was typing something, deleting it, typing again. Her reply finally landed. "I'm fine, Henry. I promise I'll explain everything soon. Just trust me tonight." Not a real answer. Henry stared at the words for a long moment, the kind of vague reassurance that usually meant the opposite of fine. He typed back a single question. "Does this have to do with money?" The typing bubble appeared again, then stopped. No reply came. He slid the phone into his jacket pocket and stood there a moment longer. The party's noise bleeding faintly through the glass doors behind him. Laughter and silverware and a band working through a cover nobody was really listening to. Patricia found him there 30 seconds later, her heels clicking sharp against the stone patio, a fresh cocktail in one hand and irritation already loaded in her voice. "What are you doing out here checking on Maya?" Patricia's jaw tightened, the kind of small physical tell she'd never quite learned to hide from the people who'd known her longest. "I told you she has her own plans tonight." "She's not answering me straight, Patricia." Henry kept his voice even though something underneath it had started to shake loose. How exactly does a receptionist afford a $100,000 wedding? "I've been doing the math in my head all night and it doesn't math." Patricia's eyes flicked toward the ballroom, toward the crowd, toward anyone who might overhear. "Lower your voice. I'm asking a simple question. You're embarrassing yourself." She stepped closer, close enough that Henry caught the sharp scent of her perfume layered over gin. "If you say one more word about this to anyone in there, I will have you removed from the VIP table so fast you won't even finish your drink." Not a denial. Henry noticed that immediately, the way a teacher notices when a student answers a question with a threat instead of an answer. 26 years of family dinners had trained him to read the difference between Patricia defending her daughter and Patricia protecting a secret, and this was unmistakably the second one. Not this time. Not anymore. He didn't back down, not the way he usually did, not the way 30 years of Reynolds' family gatherings had conditioned him to. "I just want to know how she's paying for it, Patricia. That's all I'm asking." The doors behind them opened, spilling music and heat onto the patio, and Chloe appeared in the frame gown, catching the string lights, cheeks flushed from champagne and attention. She'd heard enough of the question to answer it herself. "God, Uncle Henry, relax." She rolled her eyes, drifting closer with the loose, careless gait of someone 3 glasses deep. "I have connections that handle this stuff. People who make sure everything just works out. You don't need to worry your little head about where the money comes from." "What connections?" Henry asked. Chloe laughed, sharp, dismissive, the kind of laugh designed to end a conversation rather than answer it. "Powerful ones, people who know how to keep things quiet." She winked, swaying slightly. "Trust me, nobody traces anything back to me. I've made sure of that. Not an explanation." A boast, dressed up as one, the kind of careless confidence that only comes from someone who has never once faced a real consequence in her life. Henry felt something settle in his chest, cold, and certain the last piece of a puzzle he'd been avoiding all night finally locking into place. He looked at his niece glowing under borrowed light in a stolen dream, and he understood with total clarity that the money funding tonight had never belonged to her at all. "Powerful connections," he repeated quietly. "Exactly." Chloe smiled, entirely unaware of how that single word would be remembered later, entirely unaware that somewhere across the city, those same connections were already quietly working against her instead of for her. Patricia grabbed her daughter's elbow, steering her back toward the doors before she could say anything else. "Go greet the Whitmores, sweetheart. Your uncle was just leaving this conversation." Chloe drifted back inside without protest, already distracted by the next cluster of admirers waiting near the champagne tower. Patricia lingered a moment longer, leveling one final look at Henry sharp enough to cut. "Don't ruin this family's night, Henry. I mean it." She walked away before he could answer. Henry stood alone on the terrace, the cold air doing nothing to slow the pulse now hammering steady in his throat. He pulled his phone back out, opened his messages, and typed one more line to Maya. Though he suspected by now she already knew everything, he was only just beginning to understand. I think I know where this is going. I'm not going anywhere. I'll be right here when it happens. He hit send, slid the phone away, and turned back toward the glowing ballroom, no longer just a reluctant guest, but something closer to a witness standing guard, waiting for the moment the powerful connections Chloe was so proud of finally showed their true shape. Her powerful connections were about to become her worst nightmare. The band slid into a slow number just after 10. Couples drifting toward the dance floor while champagne flutes kept finding their way onto silver trays and back into waiting hands. Somewhere near the head table, a microphone crackled to life for the best man's toast, his voice rich with the kind of warmth reserved for people who never had to wonder where the money for a night like this came from. Julian Vance watched the toast end from the service corridor, arms crossed, jaw tight. 34 years old, lead catering manager for Terrace Hollow, a decade in the business, and a stomach that had learned to sense trouble before the paperwork ever confirmed it. Tonight, the paperwork had confirmed it twice already. The final invoice sitting unpaid, the automatic charge that should have cleared at 9:30 still flagged red in his system, unresolved, unexplained. He checked his tablet again. $25,140. Declined, then declined a second time, the merchant processor throwing an error code he'd never seen in 6 years of running events at this venue. Not a glitch. Not this many times in a row. He crossed the ballroom floor, weaving between tables until he found Chloe near the champagne tower, laughing at something one of her bridesmaids had said, her new husband's hand resting loose at her waist. "Mrs. Ashford, may I have a word?" Chloe turned, still smiling, still glowing from 3 hours of being the only person in the room. "Can it wait? We're about to cut the cake." "It can't." Julian kept his voice low, professional, the tone he used when a night was one wrong word away from unraveling in front of 200 guests. "There's an issue with the final balance. I need the card run again in person so I can clear it before the cake service." Chloe's smile flickered just barely, then reset. "There's no issue. My card doesn't decline." It declined twice tonight. Julian held up the tablet screen, angled just enough for her to see, not enough for the surrounding tables to read over her shoulder. "I need this resolved in the next 10 minutes, or I'm required to hold further service." Patricia appeared at her daughter's elbow like she'd been listening from 6 feet away the entire time, which she likely had. "This is absurd. Do you know who we are?" "I know you're the mother of the bride, ma'am." Julian's tone didn't change. "I also know I have a contract that requires payment in full before dessert service, and right now that contract is in default. Not a threat." A fact delivered flat, the kind of fact that didn't care how expensive the flowers were. Chloe's cheeks flushed, though not from embarrassment, not yet. From irritation, the particular kind that came from being told no for possibly the first time all night. "This is ridiculous. Bring me another bottle of the Dom while you sort out your system error." She waved a hand toward the champagne tower, dismissive, already turning back toward her guests. "Mrs. Ashford." Julian didn't move. "I need the card now." Henry watched the exchange unfold from a few tables away, close enough to catch every word, far enough that no one had noticed him listening yet. His stomach had been in knots since the terrace conversation an hour earlier, and now he felt the knots pull tighter, one careful twist at a time. Chloe sighed, dramatic performing exhaustion for the small audience gathering at the edges of the moment. She reached into her beaded clutch and produced the platinum card, holding it out between 2 fingers, like she was doing Julian a personal favor. "Fine, run it again. But if this embarrasses me in front of my guests, I'm having you fired." Not concern about the decline charge, not curiosity about why it had failed. Just a threat aimed sideways at the one person in the building actually trying to keep the night from collapsing. Julian took the card without a word, jaw set, and turned toward the nearest service terminal, the same black machine that had flickered strangely an hour before during Chloe's toast to herself. He inserted the card manually this time, bypassing the tap reader, watching the small screen cycle through its processing animation. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Chloe crossed her arms, foot tapping against the marble floor, glancing toward her husband with an eye roll that said, "Watch this get fixed in 5 seconds." Patricia hovered close lips, pressed into a thin line, already rehearsing the version of tonight she'd tell her friends tomorrow, the one where none of this had happened. The terminal beeped once, sharp and mechanical, not a confirmation tone. A different sound entirely, one Julian recognized immediately from 6 years of running this exact machine, the sound reserved for exactly one outcome. The screen flashed red. Chloe's smile hadn't fully dropped yet, still hanging there out of habit, unaware for one more second that anything had actually gone wrong. She leaned forward slightly, craning to see the screen over Julian's shoulder, still expecting to see the word approved waiting for her the way it always had. Not approved, not close. She smiled, entirely unaware of the invisible digital net closing around her. Julian's thumb hovered over the terminal, watching the screen cycle one final time before settling on its verdict. The word appeared in blunt block letters, no room for interpretation, no gentle phrasing to soften the blow. Declined. Chloe blinked at the screen for a full second before her mind caught up with what her eyes had already told her. "That's not possible," she said too loud, loud enough that the nearest 3 tables turned. "Run it again." Julian ran it again. The machine beeped the same flat mechanical tone, unimpressed by her insistence, indifferent to the 210 guests now watching a bride's smile fracture in real time. "I don't understand this," Julian said, keeping his voice level, though his pulse had climbed. "The system's flagging the card for a security hold. I can't override that from my end." "Then call someone who can." Chloe's voice cracked upward, the polish finally slipping. She snatched the machine out of his hands before he could stop, her fingers tight around the plastic edges. "This is my wedding. This is my money. Fix it." Not panic yet. Something just beneath it, tighter, meaner, the sound of a woman realizing control was no longer hers to demand. "Ma'am, please," Julian said, reaching for the terminal. "Let me handle this properly." She turned away from him, card still clenched in her free hand, and swiped it herself against the reader hard twice, as though force alone could bully the machine into compliance. The band had stopped playing somewhere in the last 30 seconds, the silence spreading outward from the head table like water finding the low points of a room. The terminal screen flickered once, then twice. Not a decline this time, something bigger. A high-sustained alarm tone cut through the ballroom, sharp and electronic, the kind of sound built to be impossible to ignore. Every service terminal along the back wall lit red in unison, 3 screens, flashing the same message in stark white letters against the alarm's pulsing glow. Error 404, fraud lock, contact system admin. 210 guests turned toward the sound at once. Forks stopped mid-air. A champagne glass tipped somewhere near the dance floor and shattered against the marble, thin and bright, swallowed almost instantly by the alarm's insistent tone. Chloe stood frozen at the center of its gown, glowing under the chandeliers, card still gripped in her white-knuckled hand. Her face had gone the color of old concrete, the flush of champagne drained out of it in a single instant, replaced by something colder and far less flattering. Not embarrassment. Not yet. Understanding arriving late, arriving all at once. Patricia rushed forward, grabbing her daughter's arm. "Turn that thing off," she hissed at Julian, as though the alarm were his mistake to correct rather than a consequence 11 months in the making. "You're humiliating her." "I can't turn it off." Julian took a step back from the terminal, hands raised, refusing to touch a system that had clearly locked itself for reasons far beyond a simple billing error. This isn't coming from us. This is coming from the bank. The word bank seemed to land somewhere behind Chloe's eyes, a small flicker of recognition she couldn't quite name yet. She looked down at the card still in her hand, the platinum edge suddenly heavier than it had felt 3 hours ago. Henry watched from 12 feet away, close enough to see her hand start to tremble, far enough to stay out of the blast radius of whatever was about to happen next. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply watched the way he'd promised Maya he would a witness finally standing in the exact spot the night had always needed him to stand. The alarm kept sounding relentless, indifferent to the 210 people now whispering behind cupped hands phones, quietly rising to capture the moment nobody in that ballroom would forget by morning. Somewhere near the back, a photographer lowered his camera from the newlyweds and pointed it instead at the flashing red terminals, sensing correctly that this was the photo people would actually want. Chloe's new husband reached for her elbow, his own face pale now, to confusion tightening into something closer to dread. "What's happening?" he asked, quiet, urgent. She didn't answer. She couldn't. She was still staring at the card in her hand at the screen behind Julian's shoulder, still glowing its cold red warning at the 210 faces slowly turning her direction, with the particular hunger of a crowd that senses a story unfolding in real time, not a system glitch, not bank incompetence. Somewhere beneath the alarm's steady pulse, a single ugly certainty was beginning to take shape in her mind, one she wasn't ready to say out loud yet. One that would take exactly 1 more minute to fully arrive. The gold light of the ballroom no longer looked golden. It looked exposing, harsh, unforgiving, every borrowed detail of the night suddenly visible for exactly what it was. Then the terminal blinked red, and the real nightmare began. The alarm cut out mid-pulse, replaced by a silence heavier than the sound itself had been. 210 guests stood frozen between courses, phones still raised, waiting for anyone to explain what had just happened to the terminals lining the back wall. Patricia found her voice first sharp and brittle. "This is a bank error. Some incompetent clerk flagged the wrong account. I want a manager on the phone right now." Julian Vance kept his distance from the still glowing terminal's, arms crossed, unwilling to touch a system that had locked itself with a force well beyond a simple billing mistake. "Ma'am, I told you already, this isn't coming from us." 58 years old, mother of the bride, and for the first time all night, Patricia Reynolds had absolutely nothing to say that would fix what was happening around her. The ballroom doors opened at the far end wide and unhurried, no dramatic slam, no crash of entrance. Just a woman in a gray hoodie walking in like she owned the floor beneath her feet, which in a way that would take the next several minutes to fully explain she very much did. Maya Reynolds crossed the marble in flat, unhurried steps past tables of guests who didn't recognize her, past the shattered champagne glass still glittering near the dance floor, past 210 faces that turned toward her, one by one, drawn by something in her posture that read as authority rather than intrusion. Chloe saw her first. The card was still clenched in her hand-gown, catching the chandelier light in a way that had felt triumphant 3 hours ago and now felt merely loud. "What are you doing here?" Chloe said, voice thin, stripped of its earlier confidence. "You weren't invited." "I know." Maya's voice stayed level, quiet enough that the room had to lean in to hear it, which it did all at once, silence spreading outward from her like the alarm had spread minutes before. "I wasn't invited to the wedding. I was invited to this part. Not loud, not triumphant, just certain." Patricia stepped forward, chin lifted, still performing composure for an audience that had stopped believing her 10 minutes ago. "Maya, this is not the time. Whatever petty grievance, you're $15,240 for flowers." Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. $18,900 for the venue, $9,700 for photography, $25,140 for tonight's catering, which just declined for the second time in 10 minutes. She let the number sit in the air, heavy, specific, undeniable. All of it charged to an account with my name on it. All of it authorized using my social security number, which somebody in this family requested 8 months ago for a family insurance file that never existed. Chloe's face had already gone the color of old concrete back at the terminal. Now it went further, the last trace of color draining out of it like someone had pulled a plug somewhere behind her eyes. "That's not," Chloe started, then stopped, no ending to the sentence anywhere in reach. "You told Uncle Henry you had powerful connections." Maya's gaze didn't waver. "You told him nothing ever traces back to you." She let a beat pass, cold and precise. "I designed the fraud detection infrastructure for First Meridian Bank. Every card in this building that's processed tonight, including the one in your hand, runs through a system I built and still administer." Not a boast. A fact delivered the way she delivered everything, flat and unshakable. The room seemed to inhale all at once, 210 held breaths, the kind of silence that pressed on your chest instead of filling it. Henry stood near the back wall, exactly where he'd promised to be watching, the moment he'd sensed coming since the terrace conversation an hour earlier finally arrive in full. His eyes were wet, though he didn't wipe them, didn't look away either. He'd waited his whole adult life for someone in this family to tell the truth out loud in a room too full to ignore it. Patricia's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "You can't just walk in here, and I already did." Maya pulled a slim tablet from the pocket of her hoodie screen, already lit cursor blinking over a single command she'd prepared before she ever left her apartment. "Terrace Hollow's entire point-of-sale network runs through our merchant partnership. Every terminal in this building, every card reader, every wireless register." Her thumb hovered over the screen. "I can freeze the whole network from right here." She pressed it. Every remaining light on the service terminals along the back wall blinked once and went dark. A small, absolute silence spreading through the ballroom's electronic pulse like a held breath finally released. Somewhere near the kitchen, a printer clicked off mid-receipt. Not a threat anymore. Already done. Chloe's hand went slack around the platinum card, the weight of it suddenly unbearable, and it slipped from her fingers, landing on the marble with a sound far smaller than the moment deserved. Nobody moved to pick it up. The power in the room had shifted silently, completely, and everyone standing under those chandeliers understood it at exactly the same instant, even the ones who didn't yet understand why. Silence consumed the ballroom as the true owner of the card stepped through the doors, and by the time anyone thought to speak again, it was already far too late to change what came next. The ballroom's silence held for 3 full seconds, before Officer Miller stepped through the same doors Maya had walked through minutes earlier. 2 uniformed officers flanking him, a manila folder tucked under one arm, thick with the printed weight of 11 months of digital forensics. 51 years old, 22 years with the department's financial crimes unit. Officer Miller carried himself the way men do when the paperwork has already done the hard part of the job for them. He crossed the marble floor without hurry, stopping beside Maya, nodding once toward the frozen terminals along the back wall as though confirming something he'd already read in a report. "Ma'am?" He turned to Chloe, voice flat, procedural. "We have documentation showing a pattern of unauthorized charges against Maya Reynolds' accounts, totaling $98,342, along with evidence of a fraudulent authorization submitted under her social security number. I need you to come with us." Chloe's mouth opened first before her mind seemed to catch up with what was happening. "This is insane. She's my sister. Sisters share things. This isn't, you can't arrest me for a family misunderstanding." Not an explanation. A performance, the same one she'd been running all night, except now the audience had stopped believing it. "Chloe." Maya's voice stayed even quiet enough that the whole room leaned toward it again. "You used my identity without asking. You forged an authorization. You stole from me for 11 months and you laughed about it in front of witnesses. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a felony." Chloe's eyes filled fast, tears spilling before she'd even finished her next sentence. "Please, please, Maya, it's my wedding night." I'll pay you back, I swear. Just don't do this in front of everyone. Don't do this to me. Not remorse. Not yet. Just fear arriving late wearing remorse's clothes because it had nothing else left to wear. Maya didn't step closer. She didn't step back either. You didn't think about me in front of everyone when you texted me not to come tonight because I'd embarrass you. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You didn't think about me when you rerouted my mail 3 weeks ago so I wouldn't notice the statements. You had 11 months to think about me. Tonight isn't the night I start being convinced. Patricia lunged forward, grabbing for Maya's sleeve. Her composure fully gone now, mascara tracking thin lines down a face that had spent 30 years never once cracking in public. Please, she's your sister. Family forgives family. I'm sorry, Maya. I'm so sorry. We never should have. Don't. Maya stepped back out of reach, calm and immovable. You told me not to come in my cheap hoodie an hour before I found out you'd let your daughter steal $98,000 from me. You don't get to discover an apology now that the terminals are dark. Patricia's hand fell away empty, her mouth still moving without producing anything that mattered anymore. Officer Miller nodded to the 2 officers behind him. They moved forward, unhurried professional, one of them already reaching for the handcuffs at his belt. Chloe backed up a step, gown pooling around her heels, panic finally breaking through whatever composure she had left. Wait, my husband, my guests, I can't, not like this, not in the dress, not a plea for justice, a plea for aesthetics, even now, even here, the last honest thing she'd say all night. The cuffs closed with a soft metallic click dulled slightly by the white satin sleeve caught underneath them. The pristine gown she'd chosen specifically to be photographed in, now serving as the backdrop for a very different kind of photograph. 210 phones quietly capturing it from every angle of the ballroom. Her new husband stood frozen near the head table, saying nothing, his face pale as the tablecloths, already calculating the shape of the marriage he'd apparently just entered into. Henry Reynolds watched from 12 feet away, and for the first time all night he let the tears sitting behind his eyes finally fall. Not sadness, something closer to relief, the particular kind that comes after years of watching a family lie to itself, and finally seeing the lie run out of room to hide in. He didn't wipe his face. He didn't look away. He watched every second of it the witness he'd promised he'd be. The officers led Chloe toward the doors, her heels catching against the marble, her sobs the only sound left in a room that had gone otherwise completely silent. Maya didn't follow them out. She stood where she was near the darkened terminals and looked down at her wrist at the scratched steel watch that had belonged to her grandfather, the same one she'd been wearing since the moment Patricia's text arrived 12 hours ago. Patience was just anger that had learned to wait. She understood it fully now, standing in a ballroom that no longer glowed golden, surrounded by 210 guests who would never look at this family the same way again. Henry crossed the floor toward her slow steady and stopped a few feet away. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her, the faded gray hoodie, the calm in her face that had never once cracked, and something in his expression shifted from weary disappointment into something warmer, something proud. "You okay?" he asked, echoing the same 3 words he'd texted her hours earlier before either of them knew how the night would end. Maya looked around the ballroom one last time at the shattered glass still glittering near the dance floor, at the dark terminals, at the empty space where a stolen dream had briefly, loudly, expensively existed. "I'm fine, Henry," she said, and this time it was true. She turned and walked out the same door she'd walked in through. Unhurried, unbothered, the gray hoodie catching the last of the ballroom's fading light, and somewhere behind her, the party that was never really hers to attend finally quietly came to an end. Have you ever been excluded by the very family members supposed to protect you? This story is a work of fiction, but the sting of familial betrayal is something many of us understand on a deeply personal level. I know what it feels like to be pushed aside just because you don't fit someone else's superficial aesthetic. How would you have reacted if your sibling stole your identity for a luxury party? Share your experiences in the comments below and hit that subscribe button to join our community of everyday heroes demanding respect. Don't come tonight. You'll embarrass us. Patricia Reynolds sent that text at 6:14 p.m. 12 words, no explanation. Maya Reynolds read it once. She set the phone down. She said nothing. 29 years old. Senior security architect at First Meridian Bank. Faded gray hoodie ink stain on the knee badge clipped inside the pocket. Across the city, her sister Chloe wore a $100,000 gown. She laughed.